Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Thank you for this invitation to be here. It's always an honor to come to the UK and present our research results. So in my talk today, I'm gonna discuss, there's a few words missing here, but I'm gonna discuss factors influencing antimicrobial usage and pig production in 4 EU countries. And as I said in the introduction, these are the results of an EU project that we've worked on with a couple of countries together for several years. Before doing so, very quickly, because I think it needs very little attention for you, just to re-emphasize that antimicrobial usage and antimicrobial resistance is indeed a pressing topic which has been discussed at the highest levels of not only health organizations but also economical organizations, realizing that antimicrobial resistance is indeed a threat for mankind and a threat for human health, and partially this is also related to the use of antimicrobials in animals. Another very brief introduction is just showing these results of a study we've conducted a couple of years ago where we just looked at available data. We looked at the SFAC reports on antimicrobial usage in animals in several European countries, and we've looked at several national reports on levels of antimicrobial resistance. And in the x-axis you have the antimicrobial usage, and the y-axis you have the antimicrobial resistance. And I don't know whether it's possible to read, but you recognize this aminopenicillins, cephalosporins, fluoroquinolones, and so on. You recognize these different types of antimicrobials. And the only thing I want to show here is that for any antimicrobial you look at, for any class of antimicrobials you look at, there is always a positive association. It's always the story that the more you use, the higher your levels of resistance are. And these are at national level. Every bullet here is a European country. And if you want to know what the countries are, these are the countries. And obviously I'm not proud on it because my country is on top here. We had at that time, and it was data based on data from 2012, we had the highest levels of antimicrobial usage, and that was translated in the highest ranking in terms of antimicrobial resistance in indicator bacteria in animals. Countries that have a long tradition of using low levels of antimicrobials, that's also translated in low levels of resistance. So this link is very clear, or whatever you look at it, whether you look at it in an individual animal, you look at it at a herd level, or you look at it at a country level, you'll always find a very comparable association. The more antimicrobials you use, the higher the levels of resistance are. For the benefit of my country, to allow that they can leave me back in when I go home tonight, is that there's several other countries, of course, up here. At that time, those were the only 7 countries in Europe that provided sufficient data, both on usage and on resistance, that were publicly available, that allowed us to do this analysis. So obviously, we're not the highest user of Europe, and for sure not the highest user of the world. That's clear. But if we add others, we would come to a different result. But still, this association between use and resistance would be still there very clear. So resistance is a problem, and resistance is for a large extent due to antimicrobial usage. So the question is, how can we deal with antimicrobial usage? How can we reduce antimicrobial usage in one way or another? And actually, when we started our MINAPIG project, we've asked this question to veterinarians, to field veterinarians, people like you. Obviously, maybe some of you even filled in this questionnaire at the European Conference on Pig Medicine. And we asked to 120 experts to rank possible alternatives for antimicrobial usage, ranked by people in the field. And that was published some time later. And the outcome of the main outcome of this research was this. And so the people in the field told us that they believe that internal biosecurity or improved biosecurity is probably the best alternative to the use of antimicrobials. And that's a combination of effectiveness, or expected effectiveness, expected feasibility, and expected return on investment. So biosecurity came out first. Second place, there was an increase of vaccination, and there was the addition of heavy metals to the feed, such as zinc. And this was at the moment that this was highly debated on whether some countries would allow it, yes or no. Currently, the discussion is totally different, because now we're discussing on banning zinc again, feed optimization of the feed quality, and then a diagnosis and external biosecurity and some others. So internal, external biosecurity came in here both, but the internal was believed to be more important or expected to have better outcomes. So that was the initiation of our research. So we thought, okay, biosecurity is believed to be a good alternative. Let's try whether we can also show that that's also valid in reality. So the aim of the study was to look at the relationship between biosecurity and antimicrobial usage, but at the same time always taking into account management and production. Because what we did not want to find is that better biosecurity results in lower antimicrobial usage, but at the same time also results in lesser good management or lesser good production results. Because if you then afterwards have to come up with a story that you should improve your biosecurity and that it will come at the cost of lesser production, you know on beforehand that it's never going to work. And so the farmers are not going to willing to adapt this. So we wanted to find something where production would not suffer. And we did that in different countries to avoid that we have something working in one country and not necessarily in the other ones, and taking into account the herd characteristics, a variation of different types of herds. So the countries where we did it, that's Belgium, France, Germany, and Sweden. We aimed for 60 farms in every country. We worked with farms that farrow to finish farms, since we had then all age categories at one location. And we wanted to have representativeness, but of course, in this type of studies, you're always depending on a willingness to cooperate. And we know that that probably or likely results in some kind of bias towards the better farms. Generally, the better farms are the ones willing to cooperate in this type of research, whereas the lesser good are likely not so much interested. So this study was done mainly during 2013, and here you see the picture of the people, and the ones in the circles are really the ones that did the work. I have the honor to present the results to you, but the girls in the circles were the ones being on the field doing the real work. So the herds were visited by researcher or trained veterinarian, and during the herd visits, we did a couple of things. We looked at the health and production characteristics of the preceding year, at the herd characteristics, biosecurity, and the antimicrobial usage. And so the health, that's nothing new here. That's a very classical way of looking at health and production, the weaned pig disc per sow per year, mortalities, average daily weight gain, feed conversion, and then some characteristics of the farmer and the type of farming, the management of the farm. We also measured the biosecurity, and maybe I have to mention a few words about this. The biosecurity is we all know what biosecurity is, and we all think about biosecurity in one way or another, but quantifying biosecurity is not so straightforward. So to do so, we developed at Ghent University, we've developed this biocheck system, which is a questionnaire with with an algorithm behind that gives you a score of the biosecurity. So it's a risk-based questionnaire. It's freely available at the internet. If you want to use it, you're all invited to use it. You can just go to biocheck.ugent and you can use it absolutely for free. And if you fill in the questions, it'll give you a score of the biosecurity. It gives you a score for the total biosecurity, but it also subdivides it into the internal biosecurity and the external biosecurity, and then even further into several subcategories where it immediately will direct you to the weak parts of the biosecurity of the farm. In some farms, the weak part of the biosecurity is entrance of animals. In another farm, it's vermin and bird control. And in another farm, it's a density, a stocking density. And in another farm, it's the water and feed quality. So there's many things that are included in biosecurity, and this can help you. It especially works very good for research because it gives you an objective, not necessarily perfectly right, but at least an objective way of quantifying biosecurity, which you can apply to our different farms, even to our different countries. So this gives us this type of result. You recognize the 4 countries at the bottom, and you recognize that these box plots where we have the biosecurity result. 0 means a total absence of any biosecurity measure. 100 means the perfect biosecurity. Everything is perfectly in place. None of the both we will see, and always you find some results somewhere in between. The blue is the external biosecurity, the green is the internal biosecurity, and very typically, and we see that throughout our research, Internal biosecurity is lesser good applied than external biosecurity. External biosecurity is all to do with avoiding that diseases enter your farm. It has a lot to do with infrastructural measures and with measures you can apply to somebody else. You ask somebody to do this or another measure. Internal biosecurity has all to do with the management of the farmer, him or herself, at the farm. The working lines, how do I deal with the piglets, all this typical small pieces of management. So it has a lot to do with the attitude of the farmer himself, and often it's more difficult to apply measures on yourself than to apply measures upon others. So that's likely why this is generally a bit lower. Another important thing we see here is that there is huge variability. Within each of the different countries, we see huge variability, telling us that some farms have very good biosecurity, but many others have very bad biosecurity. That's good news, because it means that there's a lot of room for improvement. On all of these farms, there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'll show you later that this improvement actually works. Also, there is not a very obvious variation between the countries. It's not saying that some country is exceptionally better or worse than the others. Throughout all of these countries, you see a lot of variation. The variation is much more within the country than between the countries. We've looked at this biosecurity, and we created this causal web where we looked at, in the center we have biosecurity characteristics, so the score of the biosecurity, and then it appears that this biosecurity is linked to plenty of other farm characteristics, and management characteristics, even characteristics linked to the farmer, the size of the farm, and so on. I'm not going to go into detail here due to lack of time, but it's just to show you that biosecurity is only a part of the whole network. Only taking out biosecurity and forgetting about the rest of the farm is not such a good idea. You have to link the concepts of biosecurity also to the system of the farm and what is going on in the farm. Again, this is good news for veterinarians, because veterinarians are obviously the ones best placed to do this, to not focus on one specific part, but to look at it at the farm in a holistic way at the whole thing. We also quantified antimicrobial usage. We've used this formula for that. I'm not going to go in detail. I could discuss this for 2 hours if I want, but I'm not going to do so. This is a way of quantifying antimicrobial usage, which allows you to translate the antimicrobial usage into number of treatment days. So when I show you the results, that's going to be the number of treatment days where we correct for the weight of the molecule and so on and so forth. And these are actually the results. Again, you find the 4 countries. We have here the number of treatment days from birth to slaughter. That's why it's called TI 200. That's assumed that a pig would live 200 days from birth to slaughter. That's to standardize between the countries. 200 days. And a median pig in Belgium, if it lives for 200 days, it will be treated 10% of its lifetime. It's a TI 200 of 100, and if I divide that by 10, it gives me a percentage. So it's just 10% of its lifetime. An average pig, a median pig in Belgium, is treated with antimicrobials. That would be the same in France, around this 10% median. Of course, there's many farms that have higher and some that have lower results. In Germany, the median is around 20%. A German pig would have been treated with antimicrobials for around 20% of its lifetime between birth and slaughter. Whereas in Sweden, this median is around 1.5%. That means that if you eat a piece of pig meat in Germany, from a pig raised in Germany, it's likely that it has been treated 15 times more with antimicrobial than if you would eat the same piece of pig meat from a pig that's been raised in Sweden. And here, obviously, the difference between countries is much larger than the difference within countries, especially with this case of Sweden. Now, I know you're all thinking Sweden is a bad country to compare to, because the pigs are not growing in Sweden, and they eat lots more, and they are raised in different circumstances, different conditions. The answer is that's not true. The production results of those 60 farms in Sweden included in our study were very comparable to the production results of the other farms in terms of growth rates, in terms of feed conversion rates, in terms of mortalities, and nonetheless, their antimicrobial usage levels were extremely lower. You also do not find any outliers here. For all of them, we have a very comparable result with low levels of antimicrobials. If we look at the sows, at the breeding animals, we see more or less a comparable outcome. It's lesser obvious here because there's other countries where also in the breeding animals the usage is substantially lower, but still here we have this few farms with very high usage, which we don't find in Sweden. So you see, if we compare antimicrobial usage in a very comparable way, because this was done according to exactly the same methodology, exactly the same formula, and so accounted for all possible types of bias, you do find very, very substantial differences between countries. If we look at what antimicrobial is used, you also find a lot of difference. I'm not going to go through this table in detail, but just look at this third and fourth generation cephalosporins. Some countries don't use them at all because they're not allowed. Other countries use them at very low levels, and one country use it at very high levels. But you can also check others. It learns us that although you see the same pathologies, mainly in these pigs in these countries, that we use totally different types of antimicrobials, which learns us also that antimicrobial usage is not so much directed by the type of pathology you see, but much more probably by attitude, by marketing maybe from companies that direct you to some product or another product, but that not necessarily only through a real biological cause. Very interesting, we also looked at the relationship between antimicrobial usage and the different age categories. This is in the sows, this is in the sucklers. This is in the sucklers, this is in the nurseries, in the finisher, sucklers, nursery, finishers. In every country, in every case, you have a line going up. This means that if you use more antimicrobials in your sows, you're going to use more in your sucklers. If you use more in your sucklers, you're going to use more in the nursery. And if you use more in the nursery, you're going to use more in the finishers. There is always this positive association. And so sometimes people tell us, well, okay, we use a lot in the sucklers, but then afterwards we compare, then we use much less in the fatteners, and there is a compensation for that. This is not what this data tells us. This data tells us the opposite. And likely this is a combination of a biological factor. If you use antimicrobials at a young age, you disturb the gut flora. And that's plenty of research showing that that will have a remaining effect for a long time, where you have to continue correct for. Secondly, it's an attitude again. If you have the attitude to use a lot in one age category, you likely will also have the attitude to use a lot in other age categories. So it's an ongoing process. We've looked at this antimicrobial usage and looked at the link between biosecurity. Unfortunately enough, we found indeed the link. There was a positive association between biosecurity and antimicrobial usage, saying that those farms that had higher levels of biosecurity had higher levels of lower levels of antimicrobial usage. There was an association between usage in the breeding and the fatness. That's what I said before. Unfortunately, we also find a positive association between pathogens vaccinated and antimicrobial usage. Farms that used more vaccines apparently used more antimicrobials. We were very unhappy with this finding. Later on, actually 1 year later, the same result was found in a Danish study, and that's also published by now, where they found the same. Again, we think that this is an attitude issue. Those are farms that are trying to do everything to control the diseases. They're both vaccinating and they're medicating, but often they're not vaccinating correctly, or they're vaccinating blindly without good diagnostics and so on. And so there's plenty of things going on. It certainly learns us that you cannot just switch. You cannot just replace antimicrobials by vaccines so easily. It's it's much more complex than that. We also look, based on this study, based on these results, to the top farmers. What are the top farmers? Those are the ones that are combining low levels of antimicrobials with high levels of production results. So above the median in terms of production, below the median in terms of antimicrobial usage. And what were the characteristics of these farms? On average, they had a higher level of biosecurity. They were located in more favorable environment, lower peak density. That's something you cannot control so much, but it is an advantage, of course. And they treated less frequently against respiratory clinical symptoms, showing that there probably you can make more difference than in the enteric disease issues. Okay, so on only cross-sectional results. We looked at biosecurity and we looked at antimicrobial usage. We find some associations. What is our proof? Very, very poor proof. It's only there is an association, but is that causal? We don't know. So the next step was, let's try to do some intervention studies. Let's try to intervene and try to improve biosecurity and see what happens with antimicrobial usage. We did that first in 61 Flemish pig herds. We did 3 herd visits. First herd visit is just to check what is going on, what is the situation on the farm. Second herd visit is to give advice on improvement. Third herd visit is to come back and see what the results look like. And we think that in this, the coaching is crucial. It's the coaching of your farms. It's not just advising, but it's also coaching the farm through a transition process, through a change process. And we put a lot of effort on this. We always call the next results you're going to see, that's low-tech veterinary medicine, it's high-tech psychology. So in terms of veterinary medicine, I'm not going to learn you anything new. You're not going to see anything from me which you haven't seen before and from which you probably already for 10 or 20 years know that it's important. In terms of approach, we might have find some good ways. So what we did, we went to the farmers, we did the biocheck, we measured the biosecurity, and now we start discussing a large number of possible improvements. But we only advise those things that are applicable to that farm. Very often people ask me, can you give me the top 5 biosecurity measures or the top 10 biosecurity measures? And I really refuse to do so. There is not such a thing as a top 5 or a top 10 biosecurity measures. The good biosecurity measures are the ones that are applicable to the specific farm you're looking at. And in one farm, you have to advise these measures, and in another farm, you have to advise other measures because that's what the farmer needs. So the only good biosecurity advice is the herd-specific biosecurity advice. So these are a number of things we've advised, and I'm not going to go in detail overall. I don't have the time for that. But just to show you that some things we advise very frequently, and then after we advise it, we also ask the farmer, do you think it's feasible to adopt this advice? And then often they say, okay, it's very feasible, I'm going to do it. And in the end, when we come back, it turned also out that the farmer in the main cases, he or she did this. We also have other examples. For instance, add a hygiene log for each animal category as an example. We advise that quite frequently. The farmer said, okay, half of the case, more than half of the case, okay, I'll do that. I think it's feasible. And at the end, it turned out that almost nobody did it. So that's a lesson. It either tells you that your advice is too complicated or that you didn't motivate the farmer well enough to really apply your advice. So if you go through all of these type of advices and add this, go back and measure how good your advice was implemented, it really is a very, very good learning exercise because it learns you how well you gave your advice and where you probably should adapt in the way you bring over your advice. It's not that you gave the wrong advice. It's a perfectly valid advice, only probably you just didn't deliver it in a good way. We also advised on diagnostics and vaccination. And then that is a type of advice that are generally better adapted. Farmers, are, at least in our experience, farmers are very much willing to replace antimicrobials by another medicine because that fits in their way of thinking. It's one medicine replaced by another one. Whereas mainly we try to convince them that we should stop with using one type of medicine and replace it by good management, which is not necessarily a powder or something to inject. It can also be an attitude. It can also be washing your hands, changing your clothes, looking at your stocking density, and that's much more difficult to bring over as a message. And therefore, that's also what you see. If you advise on vaccination, add another vaccine or change your vaccination, that's often well adopted. And then we also advised on prudent use of antimicrobials, restricted use of potent antimicrobials, stop the routine prophylactic treatment, stop the prophylactic treatment in the south, and ask for resistant profile testing, and some are done well. The resistance testing, who's not been taught at university that resistance testing is so important, and make this antibiogram, everybody, and we continuously tell the students you should do it in the field. It's very poorly done. I don't know how it is in the UK, but in Belgium it's poorly done. Farmers are not very much motivated to do so, and veterinarians stop asking for it after having received 10 times a no by the farmer. I don't want to pay for that. So that's the type of things that you learn for this. But summarizing, the only good advice is the herd-specific advice. There is not such a thing as a one-size-fits-all biosecurity advice. Okay, what did this result in terms of outcome and antimicrobial usage? The study lasted for less than 1 year. So between the first visit and the third visit, it was less than 1 year. In antimicrobial usage in the piglets, we reduced with 49%. In the finishers, we reduced with 82%. From birth to slaughter, that's the main result, because that's a combination of the previous two, we reduced with 52%. In less than 1 year time, we reduced the antimicrobial usage in these farms with over 52%. In the south, where, of course, we started already at a much lower level, we reduced with around 32% in antimicrobial usage. How about the production? At the same time, in these farms, the average number of weaned piglets per sow per year increased with 1.1, while the daily weight gain increased by 7.7 grams, and the mortality in the finishers reduced. These were the significant difference in the production results. All the other production results we've looked at and that are not mentioned here just did not change significantly. So they stayed stable. They did not got worse, but they did not improve either. So the only significant effects are mentioned here, and they all are positive effects. So it's very, very curious to see that although we halved the use of antimicrobials, at the same time we reduced the levels of mortality. We also did the economical calculation of all of this together with some colleagues from health economics. And then it turned out that, okay, there is a little cost for biosecurity, which is on average a relatively small cost. For some farms, there is some additional cost of vaccination, but we did not advise so much about additional vaccines. We often advise to improve the vaccination scheme, to change the vaccination, maybe just omit one vaccine and replace it by another, which is more appropriate in that specific situation. But sometimes there is some additional cost for vaccination, but very often you win a lot in terms of antimicrobials. If the farmer doesn't have to pay for the antimicrobials, there is a big benefit and a big economic benefit. And there is also an economic benefit due to the improved production results, which at the end gives us a result of around 43 euros per sow per year additional benefit, and around 3 euros per finisher pig per year. This includes the cost of the coach. It includes the cost of the hours of the veterinarian being there and helping the farmer giving advice. It includes the additional workload. If we ask the farmer to wash his hands 4 times a day, we count that will take 1 minute every time. That's 4 minutes a day times 7 days times 365 days a year, and we count for that. So we count for all the time, and still that's a marginal effect in the total cost, and it turned out to be positive. This was being calculated in times of bad pig prices. Currently, pig prices are a little bit better, and if you would recalculate this with better pig prices, your positive effect would even be improved. So this brings us to the conclusion that coaching of farmers is feasible. It is a teamwork. We always say that you need to coach. You need the herd veterinarian and you need the farmer, and together you can do it. But having this independent coach is really a big added value. Generally, we would expect that the herd veterinarians would do this job, but often have this third party, this independent third party being there to give a neutral advice and a support. Often it's also felt as a support for the veterinarian. It can do a lot of benefit. And it really helps you in reducing antimicrobial usage. We did it in one country, in Belgium. We repeated it in the 4 countries I've mentioned before, and also in these 4 countries, and this is very recent results now been published, also in these 4 countries, we had a comparable level of reduction. So this was not a one-shot success. We repeated it in another study, and also there with this approach of coaching, we could reduce the usage substantially. Of course, the higher you start, the easier it is to go down. That's quite clear. So if you start from a high level, you can reduce a lot. If you're already at a low level, it's not so easy to go further down. There is some probably critical minimum level of usage. Okay, these are all the papers. Everything I've told you is by now published. So if you want, you can read all of this in these papers. Thank you for your attention.